Hey, before we dive in, I've got an exciting giveaway to announce. You could win a prize worth $500 simply for sharing your thoughts in my new Bossed Up community survey. I spend a lot of time on here yapping at you, but now it's my turn to listen. I want to hear about your career challenges and aspirations. Weigh in via the survey now at bossedup.org/survey. I personally read every single response, and your feedback will help shape the future of this very podcast. By sharing your thoughts, you're automatically entered to win a $250 gift card to a retailer of your choice and a $250 donation to a charity of your choice. So you can give a little and get a little too. Enter now at bossedup.org/survey before I shut things down on August 22nd. That's bossedup.org/survey. And thank you for making your voice heard. Hey, and welcome to the Bossed Up Podcast, episode 518. I'm your host, Emily Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up. And today, I want to talk about how the next generation of leaders is completely transforming what leadership looks like. As baby boomer leaders begin to really retire and make space for the next generation of leaders to come behind them, Gen Z and Millennial leaders are rewriting the rules of leadership, ditching outdated ideas of professionalism, demanding workplaces that reflect their values, and proving that bold, authentic leadership isn't just possible, it's the new standard. Amanda Litman, co-founder and executive director of Run for Something, has been at the forefront of mobilizing young leaders to step up, speak out, and shake things up, both in politics and beyond. Today, we're talking about how the next generation is redefining what it looks like to lead and why the changes that they're driving should have every workplace paying attention. Her new book, When We're in Charge, The Next Generation's Guide to Leadership, makes it clear that this next generation of leaders is ready to rewrite old rules. Amanda, welcome to the Bossed Up Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to dive into this book because, as we were just sharing before I hit record here, you and I share a passion for both leadership and political activism. So tell us a little bit about what made you write this book in this moment.
So, in order to tell you about why this book in this moment, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Virginia, oldest of 4 kids, went to Northwestern for college, in part because I wanted to work for Barack Obama's presidential campaign. Not a great reason to pick a college, but it's fine. Was hired on his campaign before I graduated doing online fundraising. Worked for him for a year, worked for the nonprofit that he started for a year, moved to Florida to work on the governor's race, and then moved to New York to work for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. I was her email director, so managing online fundraising and volunteer recruitment. And we lost, which was sad. About a week after Election Day, I'd started hearing from friends I'd gone to high school and college with who were like, hey, Amanda, I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. I'm thinking about running for office. Who do I ask for help? You're the only person I know that works in politics. What do I do? And at the time, if you were young and newly excited about politics and wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would take your call. So I reached out to a whole bunch of people with an idea. What if we started an organization to solve this problem? One of those folks became my co-founder, Ross Morales-Ricchetto. We wrote a plan, we built a website, and then we launched Run for Something on Trump's first inauguration day back in 2017, thinking it'd be really small. We wanted to get 100 young people to run for office in the first year. In the first week, we had 1,000. As of today, we're up to more than 225,000 young people all across the country who've raised their hands to say, I want to run for office, now what? So over the last 8 years, I've been building, along with Ross up until this year, Run for Something as an organization to recruit and support millennials and Gen Z stepping into leadership positions while also leading an organization ourselves and trying to do it differently than any other organization we had seen out there. To think about sustainability, to think about mental health, to think about boundaries, to run a fully remote organization, which in 2017 was like pretty unusual still. In about 2022, 2023, in particular when I came back from maternity leave with my first daughter, I started hearing from reporters questions about some of the folks that Run for Something and helped elect over the last, at that point, 6 years. People like Mallory McMorrow in Michigan, who had just gone viral for a big speech she made pushing back on one of her opponents. Zoe Zephyr in Montana, the first trans state lawmaker there. Megan Hunt in Nebraska was pushing back on an abortion ban. The Justins in Tennessee, who were being expelled from the state capitol for fighting for gun violence safety. You know, each of those, I think, illustrated something really important and different about millennial and Gen Z leadership that didn't look like anything we had ever seen before. And as I was reflecting on that and thinking about my own experience, trying to find leadership guides as I've been running this company that really spoke to what it felt like right now, I couldn't find anything. So, stupidly, I decided why not take on another side project and sold When We're in Charge, which is a first of its kind guide for millennial and Gen Z leaders that really speaks to what it's like to lead now in this moment in a way that's totally different from the people who came before us.
Right. And just to be clear, this is a book that is not just for folks or even really for folks who are looking to run for office. This is really a guide and a practical, tactical field guide for anyone who finds themselves leading in their community or very much managing and leading in a professional environment, right?
It's barely about politics at all. I mean, it's informed by my experience in politics. And I've written a guide on how to run for office. You can, buy that in bookstores too. But this is really about work, about community, and about personal development. I got to talk to more than 130 leaders across a bunch of different sectors. I talked to faith leaders, teachers, doctors, tech executives, media executives, nonprofit folks. And it was so interesting. The things I heard in those conversations about their leadership styles and the challenges they were experiencing, all echoes of the things I had found myself and the things I'd seen our elected officials struggle with. Yeah, details were a little bit different, but the themes were the same.
Totally. And just to be clear, run for something, your organization that you're spearheading and co-founded is a multi-million dollar operation, right? What at its largest, at its peak, how many people were on staff?
At our peak, we were about 65 people, a couple less. We're currently at about 30. We have about a $8-ish million budget per year. We do things very differently. We're 8 years into this work. We've had a 4-day work week for 3 of the last years. We pay people well. We think really intentionally about boundaries. And we've also gone through some really hard times, which I write about in the book. I write about having to do layoffs. I write about making really hard decisions. And that's part of leadership too.
Totally. And so I just want to be clear for our listeners tuning in, like you've kind of earned some hard-earned lessons of leadership and management because I don't often associate what I've seen on campaigns and what I've seen in my political career, my short-lived political career early on, right out of college. That's not what I think of when I think of good leadership and management all the time, right?
No, and this is one of the challenges is like campaigns and especially political environments are not places where we have time or resources to dedicate to management and leadership development. And it's a real problem because it actually affects the efficacy of our work, which I think needs to be really effective. I was promoted into a management role. I was like, I've never hired or fired anyone. I've never run a team before. And then all of a sudden I was 25 years old and was expected to manage 25 people to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for the presidential campaign. And I figured it out and I learned some stuff, but I had never gotten any kind of formal training.
And that experience is not unique, right? Like I hear that time and time again, whether it's the nonprofit sector, the political sector, or parts of the private sector too. I think of my lawyers listening in, right? A lot of the organizations that I work with who just they value the genius. They don't value training and development around leadership. And that is a huge short-sighted mistake, in my opinion. And so that's part of what pulled me into launching Bossed Up myself was seeing bad leadership and knowing that we can do better, especially from a progressive lens, right? From the Democratic Party's lens. If we are going to advocate for workers' rights, we have to walk the walk as leaders too.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think a lot about like what does it mean for our communities, for our democracy, for our families, for our partners, for our friends, if our jobs don't suck. And actually some of that is policy. Like there's a lot of stuff we need to do on a global level. And a lot of that is based on how leaders make individual decisions about how they run their companies, their teams, their businesses. Like there's so much opportunity for impact here.
Yes, we've wrestled with the systemic versus individualist approach at Bossed Up for years. And, everything we do here really focuses on what can I do? What can the individual do? How can I develop my leadership and advocate for change, both where I'm at, what I can influence directly, but also systemically in terms of public policy and collective action. So I think there's a place for both. And you're right to call that out because this book really focuses on what leaders can do, right? And you bring a very fresh approach I haven't come across any kind of a leadership development book that feels so timely, that feels so modern. And I want to start with the conversation around authenticity, because something that feels very present for Gen Zers and for millennials is this belief that we have to be our authentic selves, and anything less than that is superficial or a facade, or succumbing to being some kind of corporate drone or shell of yourself. And what you push back on is saying, look, you got to be strategically authentic. You introduce us to a term, responsible authenticity, and basically caution against this advice to just be yourself, especially for leaders. What does responsible authenticity mean, and how did you come across or come to that conclusion?
I would define responsible authenticity as being the best version of yourself in service of your goals. That can make it sound like it's being calculating or fake. It is not. I'm going to be super clear. My imperative is not to fake it. It is to understand that as the leader, you are the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the temperature, you set the mood, you model the way you want people to behave. You don't reflect it. And if you aren't really intentional about the version of yourself you bring with you into your leadership role, and I'm going to use the term at work because that's where most people's leadership work roles are, but it could be anything. It could be, co-ed soccer league, it could be a campaign, whatever. If you're not really intentional about the version of yourself you bring to work with you, you will undermine your goals. You will set your team up to fail. You will have people wilding out and you won't be clear why. And it's because you gave them permission, whether implicitly or explicitly, to wild out. And I think one of the things that I heard in my conversations with millennial and Gen Z leaders, and every single one I'd ask them, do you feel like you can be yourself at work? Because they would talk about how important authenticity was. They would say, I really want to be an authentic leader. Great. Do you feel like you can be yourself? Almost to a T, they would say, well, not fully. One person quite notably was no. It's not your team's job to bear the brunt of your full anxieties and problems and burdens. It's your team's job to do their job, and it is your job as the leader to show up in a version of yourself that lets them do that.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we've all been taught, especially us, as you call us, white, middle-aged, millennial women, we've been brought up in the school of the Gospel of Brene Brown, right? We know that vulnerability is a powerful connection tool, and we've seen it help people go viral and have major leadership impact. But oversharing is real too, right? Vulnerability in excess is a challenge as well, right? You're not saying to just, this isn't a therapy session. You're a leader who's leading your team or leading a meeting. Finding that balance feels really, really hard to do sometimes. So, what guidance do you have for folks in terms of finding the right tack to take?
And I think it starts with self-awareness. To really know who you are. And it seems like such woo-woo bull. And I chafe against the woo-woo, but to really know yourself, know your boundaries, know the story that you want to tell about yourself and that you want other people to be telling about yourself. Know what you're trying to accomplish, which again feels really obvious, but you'd be surprised how often people are well, actually, I don't know what my goal is here. And then what is the overlap between those two? I think the thing that makes this particularly hard for people in this moment of the way that work culture functions is that the tools that we use to communicate with our employees or our teams are the same ones we use to shoot the shit with our friends or send emails to our grandparents or coordinate with our kids' teachers. The boundaries are so blurred. Even we're talking to each other in our homes. You are seeing the candlesticks for my weekend dinner. And yeah, it's some of my workbooks, but also some of my husband's psychology books behind me. This is my life. You're getting an insight into my home. And that is an exposure that people didn't have into our personal lives in the same way up until a couple of years ago. So the leaders that we take our cues from don't have good examples for it.
Exactly. And 2020 really changed everything, right? You've been building this culture from the beginning of run for something, which precedes the pandemic, but this became a leadership imperative without any real guidebooks out there as of 2020, when so many, particularly white collar workplace environments, went virtual. And so there's sort of there's a voyeuristic aspect,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I mean, I know whenever I see pictures of anyone's home famous online, I'm always zooming in to see what's on their bookshelf. Always.
Yeah, and so you're bringing this strategic communications principle to the conversation here, which is So important because I talk a lot about strategic communication in this podcast, which is know your goals and know your audience. Sharing your breakfast smoothie recipe only makes sense if it furthers your goals and meets your audience where they're at, right? So I think there's a good kind of walkthrough you do in the book in those early chapters of saying, okay, let's get really clear not only on what is authentic to who you are, but does it serve a brand that you're building? Does it serve that leadership persona that you're building? And you make a great reference to athleisure, like a metaphor there. Can you share that with our listeners?
You want your leadership persona to be something to like be the equivalent of athleisure. You want it to be comfortable, but you want it to look good. Like you want it to present the professional vibe that you are trying to go for while also still feeling true to yourself. Like you don't want it to be scratchy like a wool suit that doesn't fit, but you also don't want it to be sloppy like the raggedy shirt that has holes in it, because that also is going to undermine the story you're trying to tell. The thing that I really try to hone in on is that because the rules around professionalism have changed, the definition of professionalism has changed, because the way that leadership looks, like quite literally, women, LGBTQIA people, people of color, people of different kinds of backgrounds, it literally looks and feels and sounds different. The rules that we used to be able to work from no longer apply. The new rules are not this is right or this is wrong, but rather this is right for me and what I'm trying to accomplish, or wrong for me and what I'm trying to accomplish. And you have to like know those things in order to find the answer.
And there's also like a commitment to that because I think you make it an interesting comparison to being lost in the mall. This is such a mom thing, right? But like if your 3-year-old is lost in the mall, you do not want them running into every store trying to find what they're looking for, which is us, right? You want them to stay in one place and we will find them. And there's something similar to that when it comes to building your leadership persona, right? If you're trying to stand for everything, you're trying to appeal to everyone, it doesn't really work, does it? There's no commitment there.
I mean, like this is true in politics, it's true in leadership, it's true in art. If you are trying to be a people pleaser, you will please no one. And you will lose your sense of self and your sense of vision. Like to be a leader is to take a stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can smell it. You can smell the insecurity. Like it reeks of bullshit, and it doesn't work. Now, the flip to that, I would say, is like it invites haters, because when you take a stand for something, not everyone likes it. And balancing that is, one of the many tensions of leadership.
Yeah. Well, you call yourself someone who can be a bitch at work. What is that like from your vantage point? What's it like to be hated, Amanda?
I never, it's funny you ask that question. Most of the time it rolls off my back, which is a good thing. I can be a but I'm also usually a strategic. I feel like I do. I suppose. Like, if you need me to yell at someone on your behalf, I am not happy to, but like I'm happy to because it's in service of our mission. However, I do think it's really important. Like, the places where people hating me has gotten to me is when the thing that they are hating me about is a thing I also hate about myself. I write about this later in the book about how, in order to guard yourself against the haters, to protect yourself from the criticism, you have to arm yourself with a suit of your integrity. Like, you have to know that you made decisions in line with your values and your ethics in service of your goal. That's what helps you sleep at night when people critique you. And I get hate. My therapist told me I get yelled at on the internet more than any one of his patients. And I was like, what a fine compliment. But I know that I'm right. And I know that I'm right and being strategic. When you know that, and when you feel like you can feel it in your body when it's not right, when you are right, the criticism it bounces off you a little bit more. It only breaks through when it speaks to something that I also kind of agree with, where I'm like, oh, actually, I wasn't in line with who I am. That wasn't true to me.
Right. And like there's also a redemption narrative that can feel scary to walk down, but also kind of part of and granted specifically in politics, but part of the leadership practice nowadays is like finding like the way forward when you did mess up as a leader, when you were acting out of alignment with either your values or your organizational values. Like when there is hypocrisy, people will call you out about it. And how you choose to handle that, I mean, maybe that's a topic for another book, but it is not easy.
No, and I think about it a lot as comparable to like millennial parenting trends, where, right now, one of the big things is repair. Like, you're going to yell at your kid. Everyone yells at their kid. I promised myself I wouldn't be a yeller, but I have a 2.5-year-old, so occasionally I'm a yeller. And it's not about the yelling that does harm. It's the repair that makes it worth it. And thinking about that as it applies in the workplace, like you need leaders who can repair.
Yes, I love that. And, the direction I thought you were gonna go in is when you open the book, you say, "Look, millennials and Gen Zers, first of all, we're like the most therapized generation to date. We are breaking cycles in every direction," right?
All over the place.
It's hard, like, whether it's in how we're practicing leadership in wildly different ways than has been practiced in the past, or parenting, or being a partner, or just, like, anything like gender expression and identity and, like, just being open-minded. Man, there is a lot that we're doing. Of course, we're gonna make mistakes along the way. If we're trying to pave new paths and create new models of leadership, you are going to mess up. And so figuring out how to repair is just as important.
I forget where I heard it or read it or who said it to me, but I distinctly remember someone noting that the first model for leadership most people have in their lives is a parent. And like that's where you learn how to be a boss, is from your mom or dad or the grown up in your life. And that really stuck with me because the things that we are trying to do differently at home with our kids is the same kind of stuff we're trying to do differently at work.
Totally. And my listeners, I'm currently doing my annual community survey, and 50% of y'all are not parents. And I'm hearing the feedback from my listeners already. They're like, "Can you cut it out with all the references to parenting?" And I'm trying. I really am. But there's so many parallels. And not to, like, patronize or paternalize the relationships at work, because we are not a family, as you write in the book. Like, that is not what a professional relationship is. My God, are there some comparisons. Even Brené Brown's books are now about leadership and parenting, right? Like, the philosophies really do transcend so many different arenas.
And, I think in particular, even if you're not a parent, like it is so useful to think about that skill of self regulation and to think about like actually shutting the up is always free and always available to you in many contexts. And the ways in which you're interacting with your friends, with your peer groups, like it's the same thing, same skills.
Yeah, absolutely. That emotional intelligence first rung on the EQ ladder is super, super helpful. Also, I identify so much with you as I was reading that section. I was like, "Are we the same person? This is wild." So you mentioned earlier that the very nature of professionalism has changed, and I agree completely. I'm curious what you make of leadership presence or executive presence in the conversation today. Notably, the cover of your book has two hands, doing the classic business handshake, one covered in ink, the other one with blue painted fingernails. Like, what it looks like to be a leader has changed, but it doesn't mean that what you look like and how you present yourself doesn't matter. So what's your thought on that aspect of leadership?
Such a good way to put it. It is that like you can have tattoos and blue hair and crazy fingernails and huge earrings and you know crazy makeup and wear leopard print, and it doesn't mean you're not professional, but it does mean you are telling a very specific story about yourself. And it's like worth being precise here. Not everyone has access to the same kind of story. I talked with leaders of all different races, classes, and backgrounds, and in particular, a number of the Black women I spoke with talked about the way they're so thoughtful about self-presentation, about how they wear their hair, how they wear their earrings. I talked with Tiana Epps Johnson, who's the head of the Center for Tech and Civic Life, a true icon, who told me how she specifically dresses to sort of undercut this idea that you have to look a certain way to be a Black woman in her role, which she raises, I don't know, $500 million for democracy in the last couple years. Has done a great TED Talks. Google her. She wears her hair in a bun on the top of her head at the time, big gold earrings, in part because someone told her to wear big gold jewelry while fundraising was tacky. She was like, them. I'm going to do it my way. But it's like, that's a choice. That's a very specific choice. And I think it's the right one for her, and it suits her. It suits the way that she approaches her work and the attitude that she brings. But it is not it's not haphazard. I think that is the mistake people make, is they think that it can be thoughtless when it needs to be incredibly thoughtful.
Yes. And I like how you're underscoring the risk inherent to those choices, right? Like, you can play it safe And there's no shame in that, especially if you feel like you don't have the privilege to take risks with your appearance. And yet, if you really think about who you are, what your goals are, and who your audience is, you can also choose to take a risk and see if that pays off. Like, there's iteration involved here. You don't need to stay static. And as someone who started Bossed Up with a platinum pixie haircut and now has long, naturally brunette hair, like, you can transform your brand. I remember feeling very locked in to my brand, and then 2020 hit and I couldn't dye my hair for a little while, and I was like, F it. Okay, we're letting go of that era, and that's fine.
I think it is so powerful and so scary at the same time to know that the old rules no longer exist, which means we get to write we get to write them new. And that is an opportunity and also so freaky. Like, yeah, I can think of any time I get an invitation that has a dress code. I'm like, what's business casual mean in this context? Who the knows anymore?
Well, you're based in New York, right? And I'm in Denver, and I call it Colorado casual. Nobody here knows that business casual in Colorado is not business casual in DC or New York. And in fact, I had a colleague come in from DC, the DMV area, and my God, he looked overdressed, right? Like, Colorado casual or the business casual here is cowboy business casual, and I'm here for it. But no one here even knows that it's different. So it is funny. Like, I love a Priya Parker Art of Gathering book. I love being intentional about setting expectations around dress code, etc. But knowing that there is a lot of subjectivity, it can be open to interpretation, also matters.
Which is why, like, as the leader, what you do and how you show up and how you present yourself is so important. To bring it full circle here. Like, I often will join work calls with like a tank top, sports bra, hair, and a messy ponytail. Yeah, some of that is because I have 2 little kids and I'm tired in the morning and it's not that important to me. But I also want to give permission to my team that they don't have to put on a full face of makeup to get ready for work in the day. That if they want to show up as themselves, whatever that means for them, they can. And I say to them, like, if you feel better with red lipstick on at work, great, do it. I am telling you, I feel the most like myself in this outfit today. And that is how I'm going to be present.
Totally. Well, let's talk about setting up a workplace that works in a fresh and modern way, because you're alluding to some of the norms of your workplace that you've created very intentionally. And norms is such an organizer word. You probably will appreciate that more than most, right? But you write, people should be their real selves, not their full selves. And you're talking about sort of at work and in the workplace. What does that mean?
I think in particular, this will resonate with you as an organizer. We sometimes ask people to bring their trauma, their psychic pain, their anxieties with them to work. And work is not the right container for that. It is not the right place to deal with all of your mental health problems, your physical health problems, your social life, your civic engagement, your political engagement. Even your political job is not always the right place for your political engagement. Work is, at its core, an economic transaction. My company pays people to do things. I think that work is meaningful. I think it's important. My job as the employer is to make it as well compensated as I can afford, with the best benefits I possibly can, a place where they have dignity and boundaries and have time to do the work and the resources they need to do the work, and also time to step away from it and be real people outside of it. That is my job as an employer. My job is not to provide them a social life or to be their therapist.
Yes, I knew you were going to say that. But what do you say to the pushback? I could just hear a listener saying, I would love to check my mental health at the door, but I'm coming to work today and I'm going to have a mental breakdown. Like, what do I do with that? And how can you're not arguing that people should try to check their personal life at the door, right? It's something different.
No, it's that my job as the employer is to create the guardrails so that if you need to take the mental health day, you can. So that and we say this to our team constantly, like, if there's something going on for you where you need to step away, you can do that. Like, here's the process to ask for that time. Here's, it's fully paid. Here's if you need more than a day or two. Here's how you do that. Here's what's available to you. Here's the employee benefits we have for you. Here's how our healthcare covers as much mental health care as we can. Here's how our compensation allows for you to have that time.
And you're not going to be derided for taking that time.
No, you are going to be celebrated. We're going to say, thank you for telling us, like, thank you for saying that this is something you need. Thank you for asking for help. Here's what we can do to give it to you.
Yeah. And some of those norms and sort of like rules of the road in your workplace, you emphasize right from the job description on to onboarding and like expectation setting, which if there had to be any lesson in leadership I've learned for the past 12 years, it's like everyone thinks they're being clear with their expectations. You're not. Odds are you're not. Like I've seen so many leaders who I've worked with who I'm like, you are being so unclear. So how do you get clear from the get-go? And why does that matter when it comes to establishing how your employees, like what your employees can expect from you?
We talked about Dr. Brene Brown earlier. Her line of like clarity is kindness. It is the best possible thing you can do for your team is to manage their expectations about what you can reasonably deliver. Starts with the job description, with the hiring process, all the way through to onboarding, constantly repeating yourself, being really clear about what you can and can't provide. Even if people don't like the answer, they know the answer. That is like such a relief for stress. Again, I think about kids or my dog. The stress that comes from them is the same stress that comes from my team when it's unclear how this is going to work. Like, what is the container that we're trying to create together? We need to know the rules of the road.
And we need leaders to define success. Like, it is not unsuccessful to take a mental health day if I know what I'm driving towards, what my metrics are for success, what my performance, how my performance is being evaluated. Like that level of clarity is such a gift to give to your team. And that's what people all want so that we know we can deal with our ailing elderly dog and know that I'm still okay because I'm on track to deliver on deadline.
And this is not to say don't hold people to standards of excellence. Absolutely hold them to standards of excellence, but define what excellence means, define it in numbers, define it qualitatively, tell them what excellence is and is not. Like, be as precise as you can. And I understand why leaders are often hesitant to do this. Like, you don't want to feel like you're micromanaging, or maybe you don't really know it until you see it or until you don't see it. But that's leadership, is to do that. It's like have that vision.
And it has mental energy involved, and that's your job, like, as a leader. And you begin the book with that differentiation between leadership and management that I find myself repeating on this podcast and elsewhere until I'm blue in the face, right? But, like, we're not just talking about managing benefits and expectations and giving feedback. We're talking about having a clear leadership vision. Here's why we are doing this. Here's where we are headed. And that is the leader's job to articulate over and over and over again, right?
It should be boring to you as a leader, but for your employee, the 10th time you say it might be the first time they hear it.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to steal that. Wow. I feel like I could talk to you all day. I want to get at one critique that I'm sure you've gotten from older leaders, right? Your book really doesn't hold back when it comes to critiquing the baby boomer generation. And I wonder where Gen Xers, first of all, fall in your psyche around leadership and management. But what kind of flack are you getting from older leaders who feel like you're talking about the average age of folks in the Senate, which is pretty old, and so many people are retiring soon. That last generation of boomers is on its way out. So you're almost like eager to get these Gen Zers and next gen leaders into positions of power and authority. And trust me, I'm eager too, as a millennial manager myself. But what do you say to the boomer who feels pushed out, who feels that it's ageist to slander their leadership style?
First, I hear you loud and clear. You are not being shy about it. I'm part of it as I'm being intentionally provocative, in service of strategic communication. Like, I want to paint an illustration here. And I think it is not, biology is not ageist. Like, we're living in a world where it is not a personal failing that older folks don't quite have the fluency with the communication tools of the moment and don't always have the ability to like understand what emojis to use in Slack to convey the exact feeling they're trying to get across, or even like how to use Slack at all. And so many of the folks I talked to for the book brought up, up until I took on the position as partner, we still had to print out everything and bring it into the boss's corner office every day so they could read it like in hand, because they didn't understand how to use the attachment on their email. No generation is a monolith. There are good leaders and bad leaders of all ages, and there are absolutely older leaders who can adapt to this new moment. But I really appreciate, actually, I just got an email this week from someone who very kindly wrote it in Comic Sans, which I love, um, telling me how it said, I'm a boomer in Canada. I read your book. At first, I was a little taken aback, but I realized like you're saying these things that once I realized it, oh, I actually do really trust that institutions will be there for me. Oh, I do kind of stigmatize a conversation around mental health. And I never thought about those as like not even bad or good things, but just like things. And once I've heard it, you're right. I do need to think about this from a fresh lens.
That's amazing.
It was so kind.
You've converted. You've made a evangelist out of a skeptic. That's pretty powerful.
And as for Gen X, one, don't be mad at me, blame the boomers. But I'm saying there was actually a Wall Street Journal article a couple weeks ago about how more and more companies are going from boomer executive to millennial executive, skipping over Gen X entirely. One, because they're much smaller, but also that's not the future. And like, I'm not the one to be mad at there. I'm not.
Gen X gets so left out. I feel like millennial had such good branding. Honestly, we all took the branding classes seriously.
And just the scam is structural, as they say.
Yes, the scam is structural. I love that. I had a friend who's a millennial recently say to me that her grandmother was very anxious about getting through the airport security line. She was getting ready to drop her off at the airport, and they spent about 30 minutes talking through the mechanics of how it was going to work. And she said, Grandma, have you ever thought about your anxiety? Have you ever thought that you're maybe more of an anxious person than the average person? And her grandmother very casually replied, saying, anxiety is just something your generation made up. And so it is kind of funny to hear Gen Zers and millennial leaders, like this next gen leadership class, as you call them, we are absolutely changing the norms around what it means to be a professional, what it means to have a professional operation, what it means to be a good boss, right? And in that same breath, you're saying, that doesn't mean I'm your therapist, right? I'm your manager. You have mental health, and that matters. And I want to accommodate and not solve for that in my relationship to you. And so I do think you present a really powerful boundary there, but that's something that next gen leaders really need to hear, because we can, and some of us do, overcorrect.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is the tension here. And it's the thing I kept coming back to throughout the drafting process. At one point, my editor was like, you need to stop talking about how hard it is. It's like, no, but it's really hard. The thing is, all of this is so hard. You have to care for your feelings and your self-regulation and your team's goals and their regulation, and like model the behavior you want to see, and also give feedback when it's not quite what you want to see, and also like deal with all the externalities of the world that is crumbling around us. And it is so challenging. And I think it's really important to name that it's hard, because otherwise people think like it's a personal failing, and it's not.
Yes. Particularly in a moment of anti-work and anti-girl boss energy, which I always think of as just like a pendulum swinging. I just had Neha Rush on the podcast talking about how she's rebranding the stay-at-home mom and how people love a trad wife versus girl boss, simplification of womanhood. But in this era of anti-work, anti-capitalist, like billionaires shouldn't exist, which I fully agree with, like what you're talking about is the challenge of being a good leader and a good boss in this moment is also kind of a thankless one, right? Nobody really pities you because you represent this like thing that people are disappointed in, like institutional scams.
It would be so much easier not to care. I think about this every day. Like, it would be so much easier to just not care and to just be an asshole and run a hostile work environment and be like, we're going to get done at the expense of everything else. And I do not give a if you or don't like it. If you don't like it, you can leave. Like, I do care that people feel good about the work that they do. And I think the world would be better if more bosses cared.
Yeah. Even if it's not innate, right? Like, I think in my worst, I'm like, get it done. And I have a sense that might be you too, right?
Yeah.
Like at your worst, at your most exhausted, tapped out, we can be like excellence oriented. You admit in your own book that you celebrate everyone else taking vacation, and I think your loved ones had to drag you to a vacation 2 years after you came back from mat leave, right?
Yeah, we're back in that fight again, for what it's worth.
Uh-oh. And so it is hard to care, because you need to also model that balance in and of itself for your team.
Yeah, and I think it is really important to do it even though it's hard. Like, it's worth it, because very occasionally, not even very occasionally, pretty often, I reap the benefits of it myself. Like we're talking on a Friday. For what it's worth, Fridays are not work days for me. I went and had breakfast with a friend. I read a book for a little while. I took a bath. Fridays are days off. And that is such a gift that I have given both myself and my team that allows us to do this work for the long haul.
Yeah. Let's end there actually, because you open the book saying that this is not reflective of the current status quo. This is an aspirational book. And you paint a picture of the future of work and what it could be. What do you envision for workers everywhere?
I imagine where jobs are well paid, compensated with great benefits. It's ideally a world where we have better system-wide support networks, family paid leave, all those kind of things. But jobs where people are paid well, cared for, have dignity, can show up and know what they need to do to get the job done well, have bosses who care about their well-being, but also about holding boundaries for how much they're responsible for that well-being. I dream of 4-day work weeks for everyone, or as much as is possible, flexible scheduling, flexible work environments so that people can be full people outside of work. Because I beg the question constantly, what if your job didn't leave you soul crushingly tired at the end of the day? What might be possible for you as a partner, as a parent, as a friend, as a citizen? How could you better show up for your village, your community, if you weren't so wiped? I think, anything could be possible to that end.
Absolutely. So, for those who want to make that a reality, where can we get our hands on a copy of your new book? And where can we learn more about you and keep up with all the great work you're doing?
So When We're in Charge is available wherever you get your books. If you like the sound of my voice, I narrated the audiobook and it's all those places plus on Spotify Premium, so you can get it there too. You can learn more about me at amandalitman.com. I do a weekly Substack. I'm also just yapping my mouth on all the different social media platforms. So wherever you are, if you search me, you'll probably find me.
Awesome, Amanda. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
For more links to everything Amanda and I just talked about, head to bossedup.org/episode 518. That's bossedup.org/episode 518. And now I want to hear from you. What do you make about how Gen Z and millennial leaders are approaching leadership differently? Do you see yourself in some of the advice that Amanda just gave? Or are you a Gen Xer who feels perhaps left out of this conversation entirely? If that's you, by the way, see the episodes we've done on Gen X in the workplace, because we want to shine a light on you and not make you feel so left out too. But regardless of age, authenticity and leadership matters for all of us. So how are you strategically crafting an authentic leadership persona? What does that look like and feel like in a day-to-day practice? Let's keep the conversation going, as always, after the episode in the Bossed Up Courage community or in the Bossed Up group on LinkedIn. My inbox is always open, so DM me or email me at emily@bossedup.org. And until next time, let's keep bossing in pursuit of our purpose. And together, let's lift as we climb.